Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy. I'm your host for today, and we are going to be talking about emotional intelligence. Welcome to the show. Hey, have you sometimes wondered why some people get along so much better than others? Well, sometimes others, including yourself, might struggle. Other people seem to pick up on social clues that you miss. Does someone in your life think that you remind them of Sheldon Cooper? Well, then this episode is for you, and it's probably also for me too. Because I'm going to talk about the concept of emotional intelligence. But first, let's start talking about something we probably already know something about, and that's IQ. Now, most of us know about that. IQ is measured on a standard normal curve where the average score is 100. In one standard deviation, it'll be plus or minus about 15 points. So from 85 to 115, that's going to cover 68% of the population. Two standard deviations, about 95% of the population, which would take you from 75 to 125. Now you get up to mensa material, that's top 2%. Now your IQ needs to be up around 131. There's something called the 999 Society. It means you got to be in the 99.9th percentile. It's an IQ about 146. And if you're lucky enough to join the Mega Society, has nothing to do with any of the other major products out there, that's the 99.9999th percentile, 1 in a million, if you can even measure that precisely. Now, the problem is when you talk about IQ is there's no absolute standard for this. There's been a lot of scales put out over the years, but the most common has been Wechsler, which was first published way back in 1939. And what it offered is a range of categories of where different things broke out. And using today's now term, it's changed a little bit, but basically, if you're 130 above, you'd be very superior. 120, 129 be superior. 110 to 119 high average. 90 to 109 average. 80, 89 low average. 70, 79 borderline. And 69 and below, well, you're kind of extremely low. And there's also variance on that terminology to avoid offending people. For example, borderline has been replaced with well below average because apparently well below average is less of a concern for somebody's emotions than borderline. But we're not going to get into all that goofy stuff right now. The other thing I want to talk about is a Stanford-Binet scale, and that's a little bit different in that each standard deviation is going to be plus or minus 15 points. So whereas two standard deviations in the prior term, or the Wechsler scale, would take you to 125, this will take you to 130. All right, so that's kind of useful to know that it's a different scale. If you were a 1 in 15,000 or 700 people, you'd be a 160. And if you're 1 in a million, you'd be about a 173. So this is kind of built in a little bit of grade inflation into that model. Interesting how that works. Now, by the way, if you're looking for some scientific backing for an insult, the term idiot was used for those scoring below 25, imbecile from 25 to 50, moron from 50 to 75, but extremely low is the politically correct way to describe these categories today. Now, you can see through some silly statements, such as, what's wrong with the educational system in the world today? Half of the people now have below average IQs. Well, of course, because it's a normal distribution. Or for those who are fans of Lake Wobegon and Garrison Keillor, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and the children are all above average. Yeah, it does kind of suggest that maybe that's not how the things would work in a normal distribution. But with that out of the way, an IQ and something that we're familiar with somewhat, let's go talk about emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence, or EI, is the ability to manage both your own emotions and understand the emotions of others around you. Now, the term first appeared in literature around 1964, but became popular in Daniel Goleman's 1995 book entitled Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And he described EI as the array of skills and characteristics that drive leadership performance. And this is where we're doing an episode on EI for cybersecurity leaders, because this can really help you in your job and your leadership role, and most likely in your personal life. Now, EI is different than IQ in that it is considered something that you manage. It also suggests it is something you can do something about, unlike going to a brain gym to increase your IQ points. Now, Goleman published an article a few years later in Harvard Business Review entitled, What Makes a Leader? And the article correlated emotional intelligence, EI, with leadership success. And he cited studies that suggest that EI is often the distinguishing factor between great leaders and average leaders. The conclusion was there is a strong relationship between superior performing leaders and emotional competence. Let's pause for a minute. Have you ever worked for a screamer? We've always had a few of those, perhaps, in my background. I know we worked for a few of those in the military. And maybe you've seen those autocratic managers in business as well. And they kind of hesitate to use the word leaders for people who are like that. But they get things done by intimidation, by yelling and putting pressure, emotional pressure. Well, how did that make you feel if you were ever in a situation like that? How did it make you feel about working for that person? It's said that people don't leave bad jobs, that they leave bad bosses. And you think emotional intelligence might have had something to do with that? Yeah, exactly. So what we find then is that IQ is typically you get what you take. You can often measure that early on in somebody's life, maybe at the age of 6 or something. It doesn't change too much over time. In fact, most of the studies that I'd read on IQ suggest it tends to drift a little bit lower over time. But rather, your emotional intelligence is something that either you could be born with. We've all seen kids that are really, really good at that, really good at manipulating their parents, manipulating others. That's the way we look at it as adults anyway, right? Or able to go ahead and influence their peers. I remember back in first grade, we had a couple of kids in our first grade class, and they sort of formed the gangs. Now, what kind of gang can you have on the playground, which is really the parking lot of a Catholic grammar school? Not a whole lot, but Jimmy Ganzak and it was Kevin Heckman were the two kids, and everybody kind of aggregated around them, and you're kind of here or you're there. For whatever reason, they were able to have sort of undue influence on their peers. Jimmy Ganzak lived right down the block from me, and he was the youngest of 5 boys. And so as a result, he had the benefit of 4 older brothers to teach him a whole bunch of stuff, and I think that might have been his secret, as in a way, he sort of had a mentor going. Well, if we think about it, if you want to be an effective leader, whether you're on a playground parking lot or whether you're a CISO, you need to have the intelligence for the job, some empathy, which means that you can understand what other people are feeling, and then your emotions need to be able to be aligned to be an effective leader. Now, let's talk about a couple different models for emotional intelligence: an ability model, trait model, and mixed model. The ability model suggests that emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive emotion, integrate emotion to facilitate thought, understand emotions, and to regulate emotions to promote personal growth. Okay, well, if all that emotional stuff is all about personal growth, then that kind of narrows it, and it didn't really say a whole lot about getting along with others, about running organizations, building teams, etc. So later on, that ability model was expanded in terms of its definition about what EI is to include the capacity to reason about emotions and of emotions to enhance thinking. Okay, we've gone from personal growth to thinking. And it includes the ability to accurately perceive the emotions of other people and then be able to adapt and select your own emotions and generate them so you can align them to create some understanding, some emotional knowledge, and then hopefully provide some growth, not just for yourself, but for the other person and for the mission at hand. And this model is based on the premise that emotions are a useful source of information with which you can navigate society, engage in interactions, and see what other people are doing. And this means that you first have to be able to perceive accurately the emotions of others so you know what their state is, and then understand when those change, even subtly, so you can adapt effectively. Also use your own emotions flexibly to adapt to the task at hand, whether you're thinking, solving problems, trying to influence someone else, or to accomplish a set of goals. I'm not saying this is manipulation, far from it. Rather, this is perceiving and adapting on an ongoing basis to the human element of life. If one doesn't understand social norms, regardless of your raw intelligence, you're going to encounter problems interacting with others. And this is something we often see in the cybersecurity world, where we have an awful lot of people that may be on the spectrum. We talk about it when we're talking about things such as autism or neurodiverse, or some going all the way over to kind of full-blown Asperger's. In general society, most people view that as, okay, that's a problem, it's a handicap, that's a disadvantage. In cybersecurity, it can be one heck of an advantage in that your ability to take advantage of the mental state, which in some cases allows you to absolutely focus totally on one thing, for a long period of time, no distractions, which most people can't do. Or to take 10, 12, 13, 15, 18, 20 different things, inputs all simultaneously, and then manage all that in your brain at once and not lose track of it. And like an air traffic controller, if you're working in soccer, things like that, or you've done things, you understand there's a lot of things that are moving parts. That's an advantage with what we do. So it's interesting for those of us as parents, sometimes you see the kids and they say, oh, yeah, the kids have some social issues or whatever. Don't just write them off and say they're going to be staying at home until they're 55 years old and you get old and die. They may have a spectacular career doing what we're doing in cybersecurity, and you might get younger, new people to come join and work for you. That might be a little bit socially awkward. That's okay, because we don't all start out at the same point, but it doesn't mean that you have to accept that as a limitation. Some of that social awkwardness may be a lack of emotional intelligence. Some of it may be some in terms of just how we think of ourselves psychologically, as I said, along the spectrum. And in many cases, a lot of that can be learned and improved. Now, what that suggests then is that there are certain traits that people have that would allow us to go ahead and understand what's going on. And the trait model, the second one that I want to talk about, refers to a person's self-perception of their own emotions. Now, this is not something you take an IQ test for or an EI or EQ test for. It doesn't exist. But they're related, these traits, to 4 of the big 5 personality traits, which are sometimes known as the 5-factor model of personality or OCEAN model. Now, I'm going to give you the 5 factors. They begin with OCEAN. That's why it's the OCEAN model. Why don't you stop a minute and think of which of these 5 do you think are not correlated with emotional intelligence? Number 1, openness to experience, inventive and curious versus consistent and cautious. Okay, that's the O. C, conscientiousness. Are you efficient and organized or extravagant and careless? Extroversion. Are you outgoing and energetic or solitary and reserved? Agreeableness. Are you friendly and compassionate or critical and judgmental? Or neuroticism. Are you sensitive and nervous versus resilient and confident? Now, which of these 5 do you think is not correlated with the traits of someone's emotional intelligence? Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. If you said neuroticism, ta-da, you got that right. And you might have the right stuff yourself. And if you didn't catch that, don't worry about it. But the whole idea is that these are just sort of studies that have been done that are trying to come up with ways to look at human behavior and then map that into certain models so that we have a better understanding of what works well and how it helps people potentially develop themselves. Now, the third model is the mixed model, which focuses on emotional intelligence as a wide array of competences and skills that will drive leadership performance. Kind of sounds like what we're looking for, right? They include self-awareness, the ability to know one's emotions, strengths, weaknesses, drives, values, and goals, and recognize their impact on others while using your gut feelings to guide decisions. It's kind of interesting, and that is that commander's prerogative. Commanding officer in the military, you make decisions, and sometimes they're life and death decisions for your crew and for what you're working on. But one of the things that you can rely upon, and is still recognized, is commander's intuition. How did you know that if you went that way and not that way, you would have avoided the minefield? There's no way you could have seen that. The sonar, the radar, on the map, anything else like that. Just intuition. It's just doing this job for 25 years. I just had a sense that that was the right way to go. And you can do that. That's supported in something as formal as the military because there's an understanding that we develop these complex skills over time. So self-aware, know thyself, and like the Oracle at Delphi, 2,500 years ago, inscribed on the wall of the temple, know thyself. Number 2, self-regulation. Control or redirect your disruptive emotions and impulses to adapt to changing circumstances. One of the things you find out with kids, for those of us who have young children or maybe grandchildren where they are, is they tend to be very impulsive and they grow up in a world where it's, well, all about them. It's a perfect little narcissistic world if you're a 6-year-old and everything is done for you. And yell mommy or daddy or Uncle Mark or whatever, things like that. And everything's done for you. And you sort of expect that. And that over time, we grow up into these larger, more powerful people, but we still tend to have that little bit of narcissism at the base. And if we can't control our disruptive emotions and redirect them, we still end up doing things like temper tantrums and having fits and things like that, which are probably normal as young kids, but at some point in time, you want people to grow out of them. One of the things that I had talked to folks is that when you talk in the military, for example, is we have boot camp, and around 18, 19, however somebody is, you end up going to a boot camp. And what is it about? It's not about breaking you down and beating you up and having people scream and yell at you, although that may be done. It's to kind of break that total self-focus away where you're the only thing that matters, and then start thinking about a team. Start thinking about how well that shipmate is to your left or your right. Can I help her? Can I help him? Can we be part of something bigger than myself? If nothing else, if somebody goes ahead and they survives and they graduate from boot camp or they walked away from military, they probably learn one of the most important coming of age requirements to be an effective adult is to be able to understand how to regulate your own negative emotions and then operate as a team member. The third one is social skill on this mixed model, managing relationships to get along with others. Big deal here. We like to work with people that we like. We're happier. We're more productive most often. Up to a point. You don't want to have a boss or somebody who is just going to do whatever you want, because that's not leadership. It's kind of abdicating the roles. But if somebody is engaging, if you can create a positive emotional interaction with your workforce and sustain that, you will be able to do a lot more with them when things get tough, when they get difficult. People will have earned your respect. You will have earned their respect. There is an understanding, a meeting of the minds that, hey, we're in this together. It's a teamwork thing. But also, when we manage that relationship, we're doing it in a way where we're trying to stimulate the positive emotions and other people to motivate them to accomplish the mission or task at hand. The fourth one is empathy, where we consider other people's feelings, especially when making decisions. Now, this is tough in business. And if you take a look at some of the very difficult decisions, for example, when COVID came along, a lot of businesses had to go ahead and say, hey, what are we going to do? We're going to slash a whole bunch of headcount because we don't know what the work job is, and we got to keep the company going, we got to keep the numbers full. And that's a tough decision for some people. Now, if you don't have any empathy, if you're a sociopath, you don't care. But if you really care about your people, it's a heartbreaking decision. Same thing in the military, sending your people into harm's way. But there are other approaches that could be done. If you look at an organizations and some might say, hey, you know what? We built this company as a family and we all chipped in and we've made good money over the years and we got some money in the bank. So when some big crisis comes along, whether it was COVID, something big, or maybe a economic downturn or recession, or the big contract falls through or something like that, rather than just slash and burn your workforce, maybe you say, hey, we'll all stick around. We'll figure it out. We'll take some of that reserve that we built up and we'll use that to keep people going. And as you find out then, is that there are different leadership styles out there where some people score very high on the empathy scale. And then on motivation, and this is a real key for leadership, understand what motivates others. How do you get somebody to align with your goal? Leadership, I remember I had one of the guys who worked at the Pentagon. It had at the bottom of his SIG line, leadership is a bunch of people doing what I say. Okay, obviously a little bit funny coming from a colonel, but had a bit of a point. But it's not so much everybody doing what you say, but it's in creating in others the earnest desire to accomplish what it is that you'd like them to accomplish. Because now, if you work 40 hours a week, you need to work one person. You work 80 hours a week, you need to work two. You know, look at Elon Musk, he might be able to work 3.5, but he gets work done of tens of thousands of people because he's aligned all those people and motivated them to help go after a particular goal. And so people get motivated by a number of things. If you're purely Machiavellian, you say, yeah, people work for money. If you want loyalty, buy a dog. But people do develop loyalty. And that loyalty, if it is returned, if it is mutual, will act as not only a bridge from good times to bad times and then back to good times again, but will help people through productive hurdles, will allow you to achieve things that otherwise might not occur. People just buckle in there and they'll make things happen. Then you, as an effective leader, are going to have the benefit of taking credit, if you will, for that. But remember, credit is infinitely divisible. If you get honors from on top, share with your people. Hey, you did a great job on that. Well, I appreciate that, but it was really, she was so thin. And just point out a few of your people to the big boss. They'll love that. If something goes wrong, take the hit yourself. Now, if you have a higher emotional intelligence, what are some of the benefits that you could gain from something like this? Well, you get better social relations, and particularly among children and teens, because we find out today a very frustrating thing is that most of our kids today do what? They're kind of living on their little iPhones, and they're TikToking away, and they're texting away, and they're like, hello, come down for dinner, is compared to the face-to-face interaction. Now, a little bit older, so when I was a kid, you go out and you play. And you come in for dinner, you go out and you play till the streetlights come on, assuming, of course, you got all your homework done in advance. And your interactions with your peers were almost all face-to-face. Until your sister became a teenager, and then she's on the phone all the time talking to her girlfriends. But you're out and around. Now, it turns out if we don't have good social interactions, if we don't build these interpersonal relationships, that could negatively correlate from an individual's ability to develop and inculcate social norms. And then there's a tendency for perhaps more antisocial behavior. And this could then result in problems at schools, with peers, and later on in life. So good emotional intelligence, helping it with your children, is a big deal. Better relationships socially for adults too, because you have better self-perception of your social ability. You have less aggression, less problems. Sometimes, just stay away from that person. And you can do that because some people just don't have good self-control. And they're not going to get there if you walk up to them, excuse me, I think you're being stupid. I think you should do something else. Yeah, not a good idea. At the same time, though, if you have a peer group, people who care about each other, are able to influence through positive communications and say, hey, G-Mark, I noticed that something you did over here, and that really wasn't a good idea. Do you get indignant when that happens? You say, wow, thank you. Let me consider that. Because I probably was not the most socially adept person growing up, and I don't claim to be even now. I think I've gotten a whole lot better. But at the same time, we find out that, in general, highly emotionally intelligent people are perceived more positively than others. Considered to be pleasant, socially skilled, empathic. Now think about it. If knowledge were the key to success, the Forbes 400 would be populated by librarians. And if raw intelligence were the secret to success, the Forbes 400 would probably be PhDs. But there's not too many of either one there. It's something else. What is it that makes people successful? And it's not knowledge, and it's not raw intelligence. My opinion has a lot to do with your emotional ability to go ahead and align other people toward a particular goal, and then be able to motivate them continuously in a way that creates a positive feedback loop. Sure, you can scream and yell. Sure, in an autocratic environment or when you have the power of the state or the power of something, you can force people into situations. But like any other adversarial situation, people are going to be looking for a way out at some point, as compared to a positive situation where people will look to preserve that status quo and continue and do whatever it takes to get it up and over the top. In addition, emotional intelligence is correlated with greater achievement in academics, reported by teachers, but not necessarily higher grades once the factor of IQ is taken into account. So in that case, it tends to be more of, if you will, a hygiene factor. Hygiene factor being something that you don't get for having, but you get in trouble for not having. Think about toilet paper in the employee washroom. If there's no toilet paper in the employee washroom, yeah, you get a lot of complaints. As long as there's something there. It could be the really super thin stuff, which is why people want the key to the executive washroom. But you take care of that hygiene factor. That's Hertzberg and all of his stuff. And so the idea there is that you can do better from that perspective, from the things that you're not doing, negative activities that are going to detract. You'll have better social dynamics, and typically better emotional intelligence is often more positively correlated with higher life satisfaction and self-esteem. If you're really good at emotional intelligence, you tend not to be as depressed. Not as many people are insecure. And there's a negative correlation between well-developed emotional intelligence and poor health choices, because you don't sit around, I feel bad about myself, always around your own entire thing of ice cream on a Friday night. I'll tell you, when I got into some of those stressful environments in my life and my career and things like that, I turned toward other things rather than big bucket of ice cream or drugs or whatever. I ended up going out running marathons. I got myself in spectacular shape. And why? Because I had a good feeling about myself, and I said, I don't want to, when this crisis is over, when this difficult period is over, to have a whole bunch of bad habits that I have to deal with, which are going to then create the next set of crises. So when you're presented with difficult situations, your choice of how you respond to that is going to bring you the next chapter up. And if you've got a good, healthy mental attitude about things, you're going to choose better choices. You're going to pick positive things, and your life gets better over time. So with that as a foundation, what can we do? What actions can we take as security leaders to improve our EI? As I said, know thyself from the temple of Apollo in Delphi. It's been wisdom for over 2,000 years. And also, we don't know what we don't know. Kind of Donald Rumsfeld stuff, but it means we need external observation and feedback to help us become aware of our current state and to look for changes in our state behavior that may be trending in a negative direction. That suggests that each one of us should find a mentor and get feedback from somebody you trust and who has a clue. So it's kind of important because blind leading the blind is not a solution here. And when I talk about mentor, typically we think about mentor from a career perspective. I'm asked as an experienced CISO, hey, can you help me get into the CISO career? Can you help me with my job and things like that? It's part of what this whole CISO Tradecraft podcast series is about. This is, if you will, mass mentoring, but we're taking hundreds of hours of material and making it available to everybody to help you out with your lives and your careers and personal growth. And hopefully I've earned some trust out there in the fact that I kind of know what I'm talking about. But personally, interpersonally, you can find a mentor from that emotional intelligence perspective. Find somebody who can get along with everybody, who things always seem to go the right way, and maybe try to learn a little bit from them. Understand, though, that if there's a mentor-protege relationship, that as a protege, you do pose a bit of a cost to your mentor. You're going to take some of their time, some of their emotional energy, and in return, it would be nice if they got to see some positive results. So I could tell you as a senior officer in the military, in a way you're sort of judged by your proteges, by your peers. You got a bunch of admirals kicking around, and they said, you know what, Charlie, everybody that you go to help out washes out as compared to Nancy, everyone you help out, they get it to the next level. Well, she's the person that everybody's going to want to have as a mentor. And among your peers, you'll find out that your street cred, your ability to help out the next generation of leaders is going to be based upon the success of people whom you've already engaged with. So choose wisely. Now, there are train wrecks out there, and they may never get better. And sometimes you got to just put a fork in it, you're done. But one of the things I did toward the end of my military career is that I took on hardship cases. Well, what do I mean by that? Officers who had failed to promote. And in some cases, when you fail to promote once, your chances of getting it the next time are 5% or less. And yet, I was able to get 7 officers through that 5% I had to needle, including one officer who failed to promote twice to lieutenant commander and under Title 10 had to get out of the Navy unless the Secretary of the Navy personally approved an extension. Got that. And the person picked it up on the next go-around because there were so many errors and problems in the documentation. The person had holes in their performance record, a year where they didn't know where they were because they never got it documented. Oh, it must have been in prison. No, the commanding officer didn't write it, and the person retired or got run over by a bus or something like that. But we fixed it all. And so what you find then is that when you do favors for people, when you reach out and help them out like that, as a mentor, people are going to owe it to you. And this officer came to me and said, sir, what can I do to say thank you? This is back during the war. And I said, you can volunteer. You're a reservist. Go to Afghanistan, go to Iraq. And he did. Signed up, said, hey, send me over there for 7 months. And so as a result, that was what I asked for a payback, not anything for me, but for the organization as a whole who gave this individual an opportunity for continued leadership opportunities. Understand the role of empathy in leadership. If you have a dictatorial style of doing things, that might have worked great 50 years ago. It might work great if you're a Marine gunnery sergeant and you're in a combat situation, you just have to bark out orders because there's no time to discuss that. But in general, in the workplace today, a lot more give and take. And even if there isn't a whole lot of give and take, you can still be very directional and understand from an empathy perspective what your people are going through. You'll know exactly how far they can push. You'll know exactly what they can or cannot do. And you align the tasking and the goals accordingly so you can set stretch goals so you know that someone's going to I don't know if I can get there. But when they do get there, because you've constructed it carefully, there's a huge sense of achievement when somebody does a little bit more than they ever thought they could. Allow for the time to perceive the state of others, particularly those who work for you and then work with you, and probably those for whom you work. And this means face-to-face time, not just hiding behind an email. If you tend to be socially shy or maladept at some of the social skills that we're talking about, you're not going to be very good at getting out there and going face-to-face with people. You need to do that. I understand you might not be an extrovert. A lot of us tend to be introverts in this line of work. That's okay. But that's a preference. It's not an absolute. Not like being right-handed and you can't write with your left hand to save your life or vice versa. This is something that is initial preference, and as a set of skills, you can develop that. By spending more time with people, more time face-to-face, you're much more likely to be able to have an effective influence on them. You'll understand people, and it's an aggregative skill. You get better at it over time. You get better with experience. And the last thought I have is perhaps have a flexible set of response skills and styles that can adapt to the emotional state of your intended audience. What do I mean by that? It's not one size fits all. It's not, okay, all you guys, you just need to adapt to me because I'm the boss. Rather, you will find out that when dealing with individual people, to help them on their career journey, to help them in their performance motivations, you have to adjust your style somewhat. Some people are self-contained. They know exactly what they do. You've built a high degree of trust with them, and they're what we would call fire and forget. Joe, I need you to do this. Here's the requirement. Here's the state. You have everything you need to make this happen. Okay, let me know when it's done. And off you go. As compared to somebody who is insecure, not certain, maybe hasn't communicated that ability to make you confident, and you have a lot more feedback and back and forth. And so ironically, the best performers get less of the boss's time because they don't need it. They don't need that supervision. They don't need that development. Be careful, though, that if you're in a performance environment where grades or promotion opportunities are competitively assigned and the perception of face time is necessary to be able to have one say, hey, I'm getting the grades I need, ensure that your best performers don't feel marginalized simply because you don't need to spend time with them as much as that. In fact, you could help them in their careers become better mentors themselves by setting up mentoring programs within your team. Now, let's face it, in our career and in our life, we probably run into a number of people who have been considered socially challenged at some point. It might even be ourselves. But to gain the confidence and the trust of others, in particular, the leadership team that is entrusting us with our cybersecurity leadership roles and responsibilities, whether a C-level, a VP, a director, or aspiring to get there, that is essential to your function as a cybersecurity leader in today's world. Okay, so we've covered an awful lot about emotional intelligence today with an introduction on IQ. I hope you found this valuable. To me, it is, because it's a little bit outside the scope of typical things that we talk about on CISO Tradecraft. But when you think about it, at the end of the day, it's humans. And we're not all run by AI. It's going to be a while. And so until that point in time, developing your emotional intelligence may be one of the most valuable skill sets you do for your life, your career, and to bring happiness and contentment to your family as well as your coworkers. So hopefully you found some value in this message. If you enjoy CISO Tradecraft, make sure you're following us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got a lot more information than just podcasts out there. If you'd like to go ahead and give us some suggestions or ideas or recommendations for shows or even guests for our shows, go ahead and connect with us on LinkedIn or send me a message at CISOTradecraft.com. You can find it. It's on the website. And we'll be happy to work with you. So until next time, I'm your host, G. Mark Hardy. Thank you very much for being a part of CISO Tradecraft, and stay safe out there.